Isn't everything just so much cuter when it's mini? Well, in this week's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make the tiniest, cutest little figurines that all live in very icy and cold habitats. A little bit like the weather here right now. It is freezing. These little critters are all being made for an upcoming cake, so I thought I'd bring you along and show you how I did it. Let's get on with it. So the first figurine we're going to start with is our cute little walrus. Let's get on with it. So for Mr. Walrus, I have a total of 10 grams of brown modelling paste. We want to give it a good massage and get any cracks out of the modelling paste. I do that by pressing it really firmly in my hands. And now you want to roll it into a long teardrop shape. A little bit like that. With the top section, take your fingers and roll a divot in between to make the head. Looks a bit odd, I know. Now I'm going to lay it flat and pull the head up. Elongate the back a little bit. This is where his little back tail will be. If it's called a tail, is it called a tail? You know. And flatten that out. Gonna give it a little curve. And I'll refine that later. Now on to his face. We've pulled the head up and now we sort of want to push the face down and make it into a bit of an egg shape. And this is where the tools come in. I've just got the handle of a small silicone molding tool and I'm just going to make a mark where the eyes are and where the muzzle meets. If that makes any sense at all? That looks pretty good to me. Then with my finger, I'm just going to smooth that out. Ta-da! Now with a Dresden tool, I'm going to make a line right up in the muzzle section of his mouth, right in the center. Now I'm going to push those little sections, those two little sections we made, just very slightly out to the sides. And pinch up underneath. Try not to get nail marks in it like I just did. And I'm squashing his head in a little bit more to accentuate that little muzzle area. And that is the general idea. All right, let's put his face on. To make his face, I'm just going to mark where his eyes are going with my Dresden tool. And now I'm taking a tiny, incy, wincy, teeny bit of black modelling paste and going to make tiny, incy, wincy little black balls for his eyes. I knew there was no way I was ever getting these the same size. Once you've got two relatively the same size for his eyes, we just need a slightly larger one for his nose. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Tylose glue to attach those to his face. This job can be pretty fiddly. Phew, all on. I'm just taking another small modelling tool and I'm going to define underneath of his chin a bit more, just by pushing it out. Now using a small silicone shaper tool, I'm just going to make the little whisker holes. And one more really fiddly part, let's put his little fangs in. A little bit of white paste. I'm rolling it into a thin sausage with pointed ends. Just like that. Cut tiny bits off either end. Lift up your little walrus. And a little bit of glue on either side under those little whisker marks. Now comes the fun part, trying to get these to stay on. Using my craft knife to pick up the tusk. That's the word I was looking for, tusk. 1. And 2. Now we just need to make those front flippers. Tiny little bit more brown modelling paste, rolled into teardrop shapes. We'll need 2 of them. Now we flatten them out and then I like to measure them along the side of his body. So I flatten it onto the mat and lift it slightly, then we can attach it. Then with the flat silicone tool, I just try to blend that in as best I can. Now I think his back flipper is a little too big, so I'm just going to give that a bit of a snip. And very last but far from least, because I think this brings them to life, is he needs a little catch light in his eyes. Because those eyes are so tiny, I've decided to use a white edible marker. This one is from Fractal Colors and it is brilliant. And I'm going to use this to give him his little catch lights in his eyes. And our cute little walrus is done. First one done. Next. All right, so while we're on the subject of pinnipeds, yeah, I had to look it up. That's seals, walruses, those sorts of things. Let's just make a little seal. Once again, some modeling paste. This time I'm using a light gray. And we're going to do exactly the same thing as we did with the walrus. I believe I have 6 grams of this modeling paste because I don't want it to be as big as the walrus, of course. Long teardrop shape and marking out the head with my fingers. Lift the head, push the body down. Now this time I'm going to pinch out some of the face. They've got longer faces than a walrus. Pinching and pushing and pinching and pushing. Then we're going to lift the head. It's a little bit like crazy duck right now. Once again, elongate that back part, squash it out, and there we go. Taking my handle again to mark where the eyes are, lift up the little bill. Then I just flatten it down a little bit, and smoothing out under that neck a little bit, which I wish I'd done with the walrus. Then push his head down. Again, let's mark him where the little eyes are going. And again, black paste for those fiddly little eyeballs and the nose. Tylose glue to attach and put the nose right at the end of that little snout we made. And of course, the same with the little flippers, long flattened teardrops. And now we just squash them down. Again, lay them flat on the mat and squish upwards and attach them to the seal, cutting off any excess. Now, another great way to blend scenes with modeling paste, if you're not going to dust or color them afterwards, is just a nice soft paintbrush and a little bit of water. And just like that, nice and blended. Don't forget those little catch lights, just like we did with the walrus. And just like that, our little seal is done. Okay, next. So what's a frosty landscape without a polar bear? Let's make him next. So for the body, the legs and the arms, it's about 7.7 grams of modeling paste. Some of that off and rolling again. Teardrop shape again, just like that. Once again, I'm using the handle of my silicone shaper tool to mark in a line, and this is for his chubby little belly. Then I'm just going to soften that with my finger. Now I want this little guy laying down and sort of playing, so I'm just going to lift up the top of his body, leaving his belly down. Body's done. Now let's do the legs. 2 bits of white sugar paste, approximately the same size. And you guessed it, we're teardropping it again. I did say approximately the same size, right? Then I'm going to pinch a little ball at one end and flatten that out. Now we just attach it to the sides of his body. Very similar process for the arms, just slightly smaller teardrops, a small ball at the end, and flattened. Now attach those to the sides of his body. Just cutting off the excess and blending them in. And the body's done. Now let's do his little head. For his head, I'm using about 3 grams of modeling paste. Once again, rolling it into a ball. And then at the front of the face, start pinching on the sides and from the top to bottom. Looks a bit odd right now, I know. Part that you've pinched out, flatten out a little. And just above that point that we've made, we're going to take our tool again and make a ridge where the eyes are going. Just like that. Now let's make some holes for where we're going to pop his little eyes. Now I'm going to take my craft knife and score down the center of that muzzle to define the little mouth. I'm using the back of the craft knife, not the sharp side. And now with my silicone shaper tool, I'm going to score a little smile. To put his ears on, it's just 2 tiny little balls of white modeling paste. I'm then going to take a small ball tool and indent the centers of them. Now with two even tinier balls of pink modeling paste, I'm going to pop those into the indents and use my ball tool to flatten them down. Now I'm just going to cut the bottoms off so that they sit flush on the head. Bit of Tylose glue on the top of the head and let's pop the ears on. And now to that tiny nose and those tiny little eyes again. Don't forget the catch lights. And now with a bit of Tylose glue, we attach the head to the body. And there we have our cute little polar bear. And now let's get on to the last land animal I have, which is the tiniest of the figurines of all. It's time to make a penguin. To make the penguin, I'm just taking a ball of black modeling paste. I'm using just under 2 grams for this little guy. Once again, we need a teardrop, this time a little bit thicker. Now using my finger, I'm going to separate the head from the body. Then just flatten the base. Told you it was tiny. Now you want a really tiny ball of white sugar paste and roll that into a teardrop also. Attach that to the belly. I'm just using my thumb to curve it and flatten it around the belly as I go. Now we need 2 even smaller balls of white modeling paste. And yep, teardrop shapes again. Now we're going to place both of these on the face into almost a heart shape and do exactly the same as we did with the belly, just use our fingers to smooth and flatten them out. As you can see, after a bit of a struggle with this, I decided to do that part on my finger. Cut off the base, then smooth it onto the face. I'm using the paintbrush method for smoothing this because it's so tiny. I just used a small silicone shaper tool to define the face mask and blend it in with the white on the belly. Now let's make some wings. Some more black modeling paste and I bet you'll never guess what shape we're going to turn it into. Yep, small teardrops again. Flatten them out and place them on either side of the white part of the body. Once again, cutting off any excess. This guy has the tiniest eyes of all, so to make life a little bit easier, I'm going to use some black nonpareils, and they're very, very tiny. It's just working smarter, not harder. Now I'm taking some orange sugar paste and I'm going to shape it into a very tiny, soft triangle. Probably best not to use your hand as a cutting mat for your hobby knife, but yeah, do as I say, not as I do. With a little bit of Tylose glue and a lot of patience, let's attach the beak. 2 more little teardrop shapes, this time in orange. Now push them together, flatten the back either with your hand or a ball tool. Add a little bit of water or Tylose glue and pop him on top. And just because his eyes are as tiny as they are, it doesn't mean he's missing out on catch lights. And the penguin is done. I promise you that's the smallest and fiddliest of them all. Well, we've got all of the land creatures done. Well, seals and walrus, well, you know what I mean. Now we're on to the sea creatures. Awesome! Now I've got a quick little tip for you. Of course, like I said, I'm making these figurines for an upcoming cake, so I don't have it to base size on right now. So what I've done is I've taken some aluminium foil and molded it in a cake pan to about the same size that I want my cake to be. I covered it in some scrap fondant and now I've got something to size my figurines against. Just a little handy hint. Now let's get on to our ocean dwelling creatures. The first little character we're going to make is a tiny little orca. For the orca's body, I'm using about 8 grams of modeling paste. It's that shape again. A short, chubby teardrop. Now just using my little finger, I'm going to make a mark across his face where his little nose will be. You want to keep this indent pretty soft. Now we're going to chop him up. Using a knife, I'm actually going to cut a little bit of the underside of this little guy off. Now wash your hands before you do this bit or you get black everywhere. You need to take some white modeling paste and roll it into, yeah, a teardrop. Once you've got your teardrop shape, then make sure that you point it at both ends, just not harsh points. Okay, now you want to place this on the underside of the orca we've just made. All right, now you want to flatten this out a little bit. I think you can see where we're going with this. Flip the little orca's body upside down and put the white on. Just using your fingers, round it out around the bottom of the body. And very gently roll the body on your work surface to make it a bit more uniform. Cut off any excess and just adjust it back into shape as necessary. To make a tail, let's do another teardrop just for fun, and we're going to point it at both ends. Keep it quite chubby. Put it on your work surface and then flatten that out. Now you want to curve it up into a bit of a smile and then cut out a small V section right in the center of the tail. Shape that with your fingers to soften it out. Using your fingers, just curve the tips of the tail into small points and slightly curve them inwards. Then turn it around and push the base of the tail into a small V. Then you want to pop that aside. Then we need to make two very small, soft teardrop shapes out of white fondant. Flatten them out slightly and then place them onto either side of the orca's head, flattening them out as you go. Now for those pesky little eyes again. Now let's do the top fin, chunky teardrop shape again, flatten it out and push at the bottom. Then using a ball tool, push in slightly on one side to make a curve. I've made this a little big, so I'm just going to cut it down. Then with a bit of Tylose glue, we're going to attach that to the back of the orca. Now this part's a little more tricky because his side fins are pointing downwards and we don't want him laying flat. So I've got a piece of styrofoam here and a cocktail stick, and I'm going to rest him on that while I do his side fins. A couple of more flattened little teardrops, pushing in the sides with the ball tool again and cutting them down. Then with a bit of Tylose glue, very gently applying them to each side of the orca's body. Now let's attach the tail. To attach the tail, I pinch the remainder of the end of the tail that's already on the orca into a very thin point. With the end of the tail that we're attaching, I cut a small slit into that to fit over the top. Then I just attach it with a little bit of Tylose glue. And then of course we add his catch lights. And that is it, our little orca is done. Okay, let's move on to our final critter. Now I know that technically great white sharks don't love cold water, but this is my cake and I am shark crazy. Anybody that knows me knows that I love sharks. So I'm doing a shark. For the shark, I've got about 6 grams of grey modelling paste. Let's roll it into that trusty shape again. Now with this guy, you want to point the end of the snout a little and push up underneath the snout so that it points a bit more upward. Now we're going to give this guy the same chop treatment, oh don't do that, as we did with the orca. And just like we did with the orca, we're going to put some white underneath. With this one, you want to cut the end so it's got a flat edge and place it under the shark's body, smoothing it in exactly the same way as we did with the orca. And there we go. Now if you want to see the cake that these guys are going to go on, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you're informed when I upload new content, because this cake is coming super soon. Now I'm taking a strip of white modelling paste and I'm going to roll it out flat using a tool handle for my rolling pin. Another tricky bit, we're going to cut small V's out of this to make the shark's teeth. And now with a little bit of Tylose glue, let's attach those teeth to the underside of the shark. Once again, cutting off any excess. I'm using a small silicone shaping tool. You could use a Dresden tool, and I'm just going to put the gills on the side of the shark. Those little eyes again. And for the shark's tail, we've got another teardrop. Flatten it down to your work surface and squash the top end downwards slightly. Cut a V into the base and then elongate the two little points with your fingers. And then squish the top tip up into a bit of a triangle. So it looks a little bit like an A or a Star Trek symbol, either. Cut off the excess and pop it aside. Now we're going to give this little guy the same treatment for his fins and pop him on a toothpick. The top fin is pretty much the same as the orca, just a little smaller and slightly more pointed. And the same applies for the side fins, just slightly smaller and slightly more pointed. And the same with the tail, we just apply it the same way that we applied the orca's tail. Last lot of catch lights. And that's it, our cute little shark is done. And that is it. Now you've learned how to make the tiniest figures you'll probably ever make in your life. Everything's cuter when it's little. Well guys, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you really enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, don't forget, give it a thumbs up. It'll really, really help me. And like I said, if you want to see the cake that these guys are going to end up on, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you're informed when I upload new content, and it's going to be soon, promise. Well, I'm off to rug up because it is freezing. Great weather for polar bears, not for me. Until I see you next time, you know what to do. Go and get your cake on. Bye guys.